Hello and welcome to Byju's IAS. Let's get started and look into the first article. The first article says conclusive land titling and its challenges. This article here is speaking about two systems of titling. One is what is called as the presumptive titling system. The other is what is called as conclusive titling system. So what are we going to discuss? We will try and understand what is this conclusive titling system all about and how it has advantages in comparison to presumptive titling system. First, let us try and understand what is a title. Let's say I own a property. This property will have a name, that is what is title. So because I own a property, there would be a prescribed set of rights that I would be able to generate or take up from this particular property. So basically a title is nothing but it refers to a bundle of rights that arise because I happen to be the lawful owner of this particular property. So what will give this particular validation? That validation legally is what is called as title deed. So a title deed is nothing but the document which proves the ownership of that particular property which is in the name of another person. When it comes to India, we have what is called as the Transfer of Property Act of 1882, which looks into an aspect of governing the laws relating to titles over the property. Now that we have understood the basic idea of title, we will understand what is this presumptive titling system. In the current system, most of the states in India follow what is called as the presumptive titling system. Why is it followed in states? That is because when you look into the land, it falls under the state list in the 7th schedule. So what is this presumptive titling system? Basically, the ownership is on the basis of the registered sale deed. What do we mean by it? Let's say for example, I am a person who's wanting to buy a particular property. So when this particular property is being bought by me, there is another person called a seller. So this particular person, seller, is selling me a property and I am a buyer who is buying this particular property. So there is a property transaction that which is happening between the buyer and the seller. So when this transaction is happening, what we have to do is enter into a registered sale deed. What is the sale deed? The sale deed is nothing but the seller is selling his particular property. I am a buyer who will be buying that particular property. So this has to be registered with certain documents. That is what is called as the registered sale deed. So a sale is happening. So we are creating a legal document. That is what is called as registered sale deed. So the minute this is done, what we will have is I would be able to enjoy the properties and all the benefit that is deriving from that particular property. Apart from this document, there are other set of documents as well. What are these documents? Let's say for example, the record of rights, which basically means the document which gives me the entire details of that particular property, or the property tax receipts. Let's say for example, I own my property, so I would be paying property tax to the government of the respective states. That is what is property tax receipts. And apart from this, there are also what is called as the survey documents, which are mandatory for all types of transactions. So when it comes to the presumptive titling system, we will have what is called as the registered sale deed, and we might also have all these documents as well. So when it comes to the presumptive titling system, we will be registering, but the government is not the custodian or the protector of this particular property. In case I have a dispute, in case I have any issues within the property, what we go is to the civil courts, and ultimately it is the courts in India which will solve this particular dispute. That is what is called as the presumptive titling system. But what is the issue with respect to presumptive titling system? Let's say for example, I am a buyer. The buyer will have to check what has been the previous precedence with respect to that particular property. Ultimately, it is the buyer who has to take all the responsibility to understand whether that particular title deed is right, whether he is the right owner of that particular property, and in case of any dispute, any person would be able to take this buyer to the court of law as well. So it means there are challenging circumstances, which means in case there is an investment and if there is a buyer who want to invest in a particular property, this can also be challenged in the court of law because there could be a dispute within this particular property. So who takes the responsibility of it? It is the buyer who has to take the responsibility of this particular investigating whether he is the rightful owner, he he is the legitimate owner, so the entire responsibility will be falling on the buyer. Apart from this, whenever we look into this particular idea of property, who will maintain it? It will be the state governments and the departments. But the problem is this files under different departments of that particular district and also at the village level. So there is no one single department or a particular legislation which entirely guarantees all the responsibility to one single authority, which means there is one district authority or there might be another authority which will take and work in compartments. So there is no organic view or a comprehensive view about this particular property and its documentations, which means there could be a provision where someone illegitimately occupies that particular property. He can take away this particular property and this will ultimately harm a buyer, and as a result investigation is bound to suffer. Apart from this, there are also discrepancies that are often noted in the land records as well. Let's say for example, previously we did not have the computer tools, we did not have the digital tools, everything was being written. So because everything was being written, there might be some issues with respect to the property. There might have been certain documents which have been lost as well, which is where this whole issue of presumptive titling system may not work that efficiently, says this article. So basically the most important point that you have to remember is when it comes to the presumptive titling system, the government does not provide any guarantee to the title and its property. But now when it comes to the conclusive titling system, we will have the government which will provide the guarantee titles. So what do we mean by it? Let's say for example, in case there is a dispute. So let's say there is a particular piece of land, there is a property and it is registered in a person's name. In case there is any future dispute, the government will make sure that it solves this particular dispute. As of now, it is an individual one where that particular person will have to go to the court of law. But in the near future, if we adapt the conclusive title system, what we will have is the registered property titles as opposed to the sale deeds. So in the earlier issue, what we had is the sale deed between the buyer and the seller. Now what we will have is the registered property titles where the government will take care of this particular property, and in case of any dispute, it will be the government which will provide the evidence of ownership, and it will also keep updating the land records as well. Now what we have to understand is how does this whole process work. Let's say for example, there is a piece of land. This is my property, and let's say there is another person who's claiming this particular property. In such a scenario, all the disputes will have to be settled with the government and not with the title holder. So in case there is a dispute, this claimant or a person asking for this particular property will have to resolve this particular crisis directly with the government and not with me, is one of the other advantage. Apart from this, the government, in case there is a dispute, they have to pay compensation to the title holder in that particular case, which means to say that the government is providing what is called as guarantee to that particular title. But in the earlier scenario, this particular issue was not sorted out, and all this means that they have to go to the court of law and sort out this issue. Why are we discussing this? That is because when it comes to conclusive land titling, it has its own share of advantages. What is the most important advantage? One, it drastically reduces the number of cases that are filed in the court of law. When we go back to the year 2007, according to World Bank, it had given out one of the reports called as the Land Policies for Growth and Property Reduction. According to this particular report, it says that 2/3 of the cases that are present in the court of law is in reference to the property disputes. Again, there was a Niti Aayog study as well. It says that according to the property cases which are filed in the court of law, it nearly takes 20 years for resolving this case. So if we have the government which is taking care of this whole system and is providing the compensation and is guaranteeing the titles, which means there would be lower litigation and number of cases over a period of time will start reducing, says this article. Further, investors who want to purchase land for business activities will be able to do so without facing the constant risk. What exactly happens? Let's say there is a big piece of land. land. This piece of land is a hereditary property. So this hereditary property, let's say it is broken down into 4 pieces of land. So this will go to one person, this will go to another person, this will go to another person. So the final piece of land will go to another person. Now let's say a company is buying this particular 4th piece of property. But what would happen? Who will it go to? Will depend on the surveyor. It depends on the guidelines, and this can also lead to corruption as well. So there might be an issue in the near future where one of the persons from the family can claim this piece of land, and as a result this investor has to go to the court of law, and he's invested on this particular property. He wanted to start off with his operations with whatever the manufacturing or whatever his services are, but because there is a litigation, it is the investor who is bound to suffer. Now let's take the example when it comes to the urban areas. There could be hurdles when it comes to the infrastructure development and housing construction as well. How? Let's say for example, if government wants to take up a particular property, or there has to be construction of the housing as well. In all these cases, what we require is litigation free property, and as a result, because there might be litigations, investments in the urban areas will also be a major problem. Now when we go back to the rural areas, access to the agricultural credit is dependent on the ability to use land as the collateral. What do we mean by it? Let's say for example, I am a farmer who's present in the rural area. Now I need some money. Why? Because I need it for the fertilizers and also for sowing of seeds as well. So what do? I go to the bank and I ask for the finance, but the bank in this particular case will ask for the collateral. But in this particular case, let's say my property is in dispute, or I do not have any idea about the documentation because I'm an illiterate person. In these cases, the banks will not offer the finances to me because I do not have enough documentations or the papers which is in support of my documentation or my land deed. As a result, we would again have issues at the rural sector as well. In order to overcome all these issues, in order to make sure that these issues does not persist, the Niti Aayog has come up with one of the bill, and that is to do with what is called as the conclusive titling system. What is the view of the central government? Let's say for example, the central government or its missionary, or let's say for example, there are private organizers or the private entrepreneurs or the industrialists want to acquire this particular property. Each state has its own set of system. If this particular system is present, it will give rise to conflicting viewpoints. Let's say there is a particular set of law in Maharashtra, or let's say there is a particular set of laws in West Bengal. There might be conflicting laws and guidelines. If it is uniform in the form of conclusive titling system, it will be easy for purchasing of the land. That is why central government is insisting on uniformity. Ideally, it is for the states to decide, it is for the states to apply, and it is for the state to prescribe a particular land guidelines. But the central government is just giving an idea so that we can come up with what is called as the conclusive titling system. So what is this particular bill or the draft copy that has been released by the Niti Aayog? According to Niti Aayog, it says that land authorities will be set up in each government area. So what we will have is one particular officer who would be appointed, called as the title registration officer. Who is this title registration officer? Let's say for example, there is one property. This property will have a particular person who will be a title holder. So what will this title registration officer do? He will put out a notice saying that this particular piece of land will belong to this particular person. So let's say there is my house, or let's say there is my property. So this title registration officer will put out a notice saying that this particular property belongs to so and so person. This particular property belongs to Krishna. This particular property belongs to Irfan. So a notice is given by this title registration officer. Now let's assume a position where there is a claimant who says that he has an objection to this particular notice. He says that it is not the property of so and so person, but it is his property. So this will be validated by the title registration office and ultimately will go to the land dispute resolution officer. So the land dispute resolution officer will look into it, and in case there are people who are opposing this particular notice or they are claiming that it is not their property, In such a case, they can go to the Land Titling Appellate Tribunal. If all these issues are still not sorted out, finally they can appeal before the High Court as well. But kindly note, in case there is a dispute that is already present and it is being fought in the court of law, such cases will not be taken up by the title registration officer. But what are the challenges when it comes to the implementation of the conclusive titling system? Land records have not been updated for decades. Let's say, for example, there is a hereditary property. This is from the great grandfather or from the grandfather. So there might be an assumption that this is their property, but this is not converted into their names, which means there is an issue when it comes to the property rights. Apart from this, whenever a particular survey has to be conducted, the regional officers or the state governments will have to provide the resources and the manpower. The digital tools and techniques will have to employ more people to conduct the survey in that particular region. In the present case, there have been certain state governments which have not provided the money on the funding and resources or the manpower to conduct the survey, which could be a major problem for the conclusive titling system. It is this that we have to understand in reference to this article. Now let's look into the next article. This article here is speaking about central public sector enterprises and its privatization. We have Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman ji, who had announced in budget speech of 2020 and 21 that a new policy will be coming up in terms of the strategic sector and the non-strategic sector and about its disinvestment plans. What are these strategic sectors? Those areas where the government will have minimum amount of presence is what is called as the strategic sectors. Which are these sectors? Atomic energy, space and defense, transport and telecommunication, power, petroleum, coal and other minerals, banking, insurance and financial services. These are called as strategic sectors. In all these sectors, the government will have minimum presence when it comes to the central public sector enterprises. In case there are any other sectors apart from this, they will either be privatized or they will be completely dissolved, or its leadership and its management will be given to the private agencies, or it will be gelled up with an other central public sector units. This is what was said by Nirmala Sitharaman ji in the budget of 2021 and 22. What is the objective of this disinvestment or the privatization? There are two major objectives. One is that the government has no business to stay in the business, which means to say it is giving a platform for the private entrepreneurs, private organizations, private companies to invest in all these areas so that they can bring in more technology, they would be able to employ more number of people, and management practices will also contribute to the growth and glory of this particular sector. Apart from this, whenever there is a disinvestment, the management goes to the private organizations, and at the same time the money is also generated from this disinvestment. So what will the government do? The money that is generated from this disinvestment will be used by the government for the government schemes and programs and for the government sector schemes as well. So what we will have is two in nature, where the government feels that more private investment will happen in this particular sector and the money that is generated can be used for the government schemes and programs. So what is the government doing? It is now clear that about 151 public sector firms in non-strategic sectors. What are these non-strategic sectors? Anything beyond these four sectors will be the non-strategic sectors, including 83 holding companies and 68 subsidiaries will either be closed or sold to a private company. So the policy will also bring the public sector banks and insurance entities into the disinvestment ambit for the very first time, says according to this budget 2021 and 22, says this article. How is this disinvestment process completely different from the past? When we go back to the Vajpayee government and its disinvestment policy, it was on a case-to-case basis. So it was not on an organic basis, it was not on a holistic basis, but certain operations which are not doing good, a CPCE which was not working efficiently, which were not able to generate profits, only such were selectively picked up and they were disinvested or they were privatized. But in the present scenario, most of the sectors, the central public sector entities have been privatized except for the strategic sectors. So what we have is that particular idea where government has no business to be in business is coming into reality. What do you think? Is it the right move by the government? Should all these sectors be disinvested and privatized? please give your answers on the comment section, and when you're typing your answers, answer like a civil servant and not like a layman. How will this whole process work? The government has given this responsibility to the Niti Aayog. So they will identify which are the central public sector units which has to be disinvested or privatized. And after this, it will be sent to the core group of secretaries on disinvestment. They will look into this particular proposal. They'll suggest the same to the ministerial group, and from the ministerial group, it will go to DIPAM, that is the Department of Investment and Public Asset Management. They will give their recommendation to the Cabinet Committee on Economic Affairs, and finally it is the Cabinet Committee on the Economic Affairs which will formalize the recommendation and ultimately see if it can be disinvested or privatized. But there are some exceptions when it comes to which are the sectors that will be disinvested. Let's say for example, if there is a particular organization which is engaged in activities that are allied to the farm sector, that will not be disinvested. There are departments with commercial operations like railways and posts that will not be disinvested. Or let's say for example, there are certain CPSEs which have been maintaining critical data having a bearing on the national security. Such will also not be touched by the government. Why? Because these are the important sectors. So what we have to remember is that this particular idea has been taken up by the government in order to keep up to two objectives. One, the money that is generated will be used for social sector schemes and programs, and the government has no business to do business, which means private entrepreneurs, organizations and its entities will be given a more wider platform so that they can engage and conduct their business operations. But this is also having certain risks, says the author in this particular article. What are these risks? Let's say for example, there is one of the central public sector units. Ideally, if this particular central public sector unit is being sold, there is no new investment, there is no new idea that is being created. Instead, the private entrepreneur is taking this particular sector, which means there are no new investments that are being made, says the author. Apart from this, let's say in the present scenario, we are all hit by the COVID-19 and its issues. Can we actually see real bidding taking place with respect to this central public sector units? Why? In case it was normal circumstances, we might have more bidding for this particular CPSE, but because of COVID-19, if this particular project had a price value of about 1000 crores, now we would have, let's say, about 500 crores for the central public sector unit. As a result, the amount of money that we would be able to generate because of COVID-19 and its issues will be comparatively less, says this article. It is this that we have to understand in reference to this article. Now let's look into the next article. This article says new air travel rules given by the government of India. What is this article speaking about? The central government has confirmed that there are different type of mutants when it comes to the COVID-19. We have discussed this as well. One is in reference to the United Kingdom, then it is with respect to the South Africa, and the new variant is also present in Brazil as well. So if they are coming into India, there could be people who would also be impacted as well, and as a result, the government has come up with the guidelines so that it can bring an end or reduce the impact of the COVID-19 and its variant. Why is it important? That is because according to the World Health Organization, all these three variants have more transmissibility compared to the old COVID virus, says this article. So what are the new guidelines released by the government of India? They have clearly said that in case there are people coming from United Kingdom, South Africa or Brazil, they have to submit a self-declaration from online, carry a negative COVID-19 report and mention their travel history for the past 14 days. And in case they have actually fabricated it and in case they have not complied by these guidelines, they will be booked under criminal prosecution, says this guidelines. Apart from this, there are also airlines as well. What should these airlines do? Let's say for example, we have Indigo, or let's say for example, there is any other airlines as well. In case they see people coming from the transit of United Kingdom or South Africa or Brazil, they should be given a separate lane or a compartment when it comes to that particular aeroplane. So what we will have is these sections of the people will be segregated during the journey as well as while deboarding. Now when it comes to India, we have one of the multi-laboratory network called as Indian SARS-CoV-2 Genomics Consortium. It currently has about 10 laboratories. What will it do? It will identify the various variants, it will try and identify the root cause of it, and all the knowledge that is generated will be shared so that people are aware about the variants and what precautionary measures have to be taken as well. It is this that we have to understand in reference to this article. Now let's look into the next article. This article says an estimate of WASH across healthcare facilities in India. What does WASH stands for? It stands for water, sanitation and hygiene facilities, for which money is to be spent in India in order to prevent infection spread and the control mechanism. What are we speaking about? Researchers from the Center for Disease Dynamics, Economics and Policy belonging to Maryland in United States of America had published one of the articles in BMJ Global Health. According to the researchers, they say that India has to spend nearly 354 million in capital costs and $289 million when it comes to the recurrent expenses in one particular year in order to prevent the infection spread because of WASH, what is called as the water, sanitation and hygiene. If we are able to spend this much amount of money for providing quality of water, sanitation facilities and hygiene facilities, we would be in a position to reduce the impact of infection, says this article. What are the sectors where most amount of money will be spent? This includes water, linen reprocessing and sanitation. What are the expenses where least amount of money would be spent? Hand hygiene, medical device reprocessing and environmental surface cleaning. Why is this very important? That is because according to the World Health Organization on the WASH healthcare facilities, it points out that 8,27,000 people in low middle income countries die as a result of inadequate water, sanitation and hygiene each year, and this has also resulted in 2,97,000 children under 5 years who can be prevented each year if proper water, hygiene and sanitation is provided to these people. What are the various other infections? Common healthcare associated infections include central line associated bloodstream infections, catheter associated urinary tract infections, surgical site infections, ventilator associated pneumonia. If we are able to spend on water, sanitation and hygiene, we can reduce the impact of the infection, says this article. If we are able to reduce the impact of the infection, we would be able to meet the sustainable developmental goals, and at the same time we would be also able to minimize the antimicrobial resistance, says this article. So this article in brief says if we are able to spend the money in a particular year, we would be able to minimize the impact of infection. It is this that we have to understand in reference to this article. Now let's look into the next article. This article says wettest place on earth sees decreasing trend in rainfall. What are we speaking about? We are speaking about the place called as Mawsynram. This happens to be a town in the East Khasi Hills district of Meghalaya. It is known to receive the highest rainfall in India, and it is also said that it is the wettest place on earth with an average annual rainfall of 11,872 millimeters. This article currently goes on to say that over a period of time in last number of decades there has been a considerable drop when it comes to rainfall in Mawsynram. Before we understand what is the article trying to convey, we have to understand why there is excessive rainfall in the Mawsynram region, for which we have to have a fair bit of an idea about the southwest monsoon. What exactly happens in India? We have the summer season. When does it happen? It happens from March up until May. During this particular period, the land is heated up, which means it generates what is called as the low pressure, and when you consider the oceanic conditions, what we have is the high pressure in the oceanic conditions. So what exactly happens? The wind moves from the high pressure to the low pressure. We have two important branches. One is the Arabian Sea branch, the other is the Bay of Bengal branch. When it comes to Arabian Sea branch, it hits Kerala, it hits Karnataka, it also hits Maharashtra, and it eventually goes through the Vindhyan region as well. Now what we have to focus is on the Bay of Bengal branch. When it comes to the Bay of Bengal branch, it goes through this particular region, and we also have the extension of the Himalayas called as the Arakan. Yes, this particular southwest monsoon does bring range to the Myanmar region, but because of the Arakan Nyoma, or what we have is the extinction of the Himalayas, is certain winds are diverted towards the Bangladesh. So what exactly happens? We do not have any of the mountains here, and because it's a plain region, it enters the fold of India. And in India, what we have is the Garo, Khasi Hills, and in the Khasi Hills is what we have is the main syndrome. So what exactly happens? Because there is Arakanyoma which has diverted some or deflected some amount of water, there is moisture that is carried from the oceans, and because of the orographic range, what we have is excessive rainfall in the Khasi region. Now when we go back to the article goes on to say that there has been a considerable drop when it comes to the rainfall in this particular region. What are the possible reasons? One is because of the human influence, second is because of the deforestation in the northeast region, and third is reduction in the vegetation and increase in the cropland when it comes to the agricultural activities. So because of deforestation, because of the human induced activities, and at the same time because of increase in the cropland, there has been a considerable drop, says this article. So what should be done? Going forward, we have to respect the nature, we have to make sure there is more increase in the forest cover, and at the same time we should not be depleting the vegetation, says this article. It is this that we have to understand in reference to this article. Now let's look into the mains practice questions. How is conclusive titling system different from presumptive titling system? What are the difficulties in the implementation of conclusive titling system? Next question, the government's promise on disinvestment should not only be used for bridging the fiscal gap but also for the creation of new assets to revive the economy. Discuss. So please write all your answers on the comment section. Peer review. In case you've liked our initiative, please do like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. So this is it for today. Thank you for watching. All the best.